A man remains in custody tonight, a week after Duluth police say he stabbed an officer in the chest with a sword. As Northern News Now's Larissa Millis reports, that officer might not still be with us if it weren't for the protective gear he was wearing.
Last Monday, DPD responded to Greysolon downtown, where there were reports of a man with a sword barricading himself in an apartment. Due to the nature of the incident, a special unit was brought in.
Our tactical response team is a specialty unit of a handful of officers who are called in when we have our worst situations, our most difficult situations where specialized equipment is needed.
In a court record made public Monday, the man was identified as Alexander Doherty, who's now charged with 7 felonies, including attempted murder. That's because one of the responding tactical response team members, Ian Johnson, an 11-year veteran of the DPD, was allegedly stabbed in the chest by Doherty. But thanks to Johnson's protective vest, Doherty's sword did not penetrate him.
It's fair to say that, that hitting that rifle plate that was inside of his vest, stopped that object from going in him. Fortunately, it was where he was wearing protective equipment.
In an interview Tuesday with Chief Mike Sanoa, he told us the department's ballistic and tactical protective vests are replaced every 5 years through state and federal grants. They cost anywhere from about $1,500 to $3,000. Sanoa says that vest saved Officer Johnson's life.
He's doing well. I think it was definitely a scary situation for him. But he told me, his training kicked in, things worked the way they were supposed to.
Johnson only suffered a cut to his hand. He did not have to go to the hospital and is still on duty. In Duluth, Larissa Millis, Northern News Now.
We asked Sanoa why the department didn't reveal Johnson was stabbed until a week later. He says the department wasn't aware of the stabbing until after their debrief, and due to Minnesota law, they can't release certain details that court records can, so they chose to wait until the documents were released.